Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Mr. Akers could not make it. His flight was canceled, but we are going to carry on with a impromptu fireside chat. Brian, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks. So happy to be here and talking to you all.
So for the interested but uninitiated, can you tell us a little bit about what AFWERX is and what you guys do?
Sure. So AFWERX is the innovation arm of the Air Force. We're actually part of the Air Force Research Lab, but we have three divisions underneath AFWERX. The first is the Spark division, which handles grassroots innovation. We manage the ecosystem of innovators that if an airman has a good idea about how to turn a wrench differently or do his job or her job differently, we manage that ecosystem and help transition those ideas and provide the resources to prototype and adapt and scale across the DAF. We also have the Ventures division, which manages the about $1 billion Air Force SBIR portfolio. They manage the open topic calls, the specific topic calls, and also the StratFi and TACFi processes that provide government matching funds to program offices and other entities to have increased scope and workload for promising technologies. Those are kind of our big bets that we're allowed to provide additional capital to transition the Valley of Death. We have the Prime division, which I work in. We focus on more commercial dual use and mature technologies. We look at things such as like the Agility Prime program, which was our first that started about 3 years ago with Dr. Roper, looking at electric vertical and takeoff and landing vehicles. We also have the Autonomy Prime program, which I'm the director of and branch chief. It's looking at autonomy capabilities and how we can transition those and act as a tech scout to larger programs of record.
So you said autonomy, which I feel like is the key word here.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that portfolio?
Yeah, so underneath my Autonomy Prime portfolio, we just kind of soft launched it a couple months ago. We'll look for a full launch at the beginning of next fiscal year. But we spent 18 months doing market research, looking at different internal projects that were going on, external projects that were going on, in emerging tech areas such as supersonics, microelectronics, energy, those sorts of things. We coalesced on autonomy because we saw a booming commercial marketplace and also an increased need for the Department of the Air Force and the warfighters really wanting that autonomy.
Sorry,
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Finish your thought.
Yeah, I was going to say, we were just looking at gaps and seams across those and found that the ability to test those capabilities and iterate and mature those was a major lacking area. So one of our kind of fundamental tenets of Autonomy Prime is this proving ground concept that we're going to stand up as a series of multiple small UASs that are protected by a kind of a sandbox environment so that we can iterate on capabilities in a safe and mature manner.
So is it only small UAS, or are you talking about bigger autonomous flying platforms like helicopters? Tell me more about that.
Sure. So we are kind of focused on really small UASs, groups 1, 2, and 3s as our platform or autonomy platforms. We're also looking at larger we'll call them retrofitted cargo mission aircraft, such as the reliable robotics in the world, X-Wing, that are taking Cessna 208s for cargo missions and removing the pilot from those capabilities or those platforms for some of these feeder cargo missions. You can think UPS and FedEx are really interested in investing in those two companies specifically, but you think like when the military needs to do small, short logistics runs, that's also a really good capability to have. So we're investing in that tech area, seeing what is, make sure we have our temperature on the pulse of the industry in those areas and seeing how we can adapt to the military use case.
So talk a little bit more about, I want to talk about the human operator perspective of this, because there are always humans in the loop, at least that's the outlook right now. What's some of the feedback that you're getting as you're exploring these dual-use technologies and the use cases for the military?
Yeah, so I used to think that trust was the major barrier for autonomy in the DAF. We saw the kind of historical use case of auto GCAS, the auto ground collision and avoidance system that they have in the F-16. When it first came out, wing commanders and group commanders were telling their pilots not to turn it on because it was going to take over their aircraft and it could cause them to crash, when in fact the inverse was true. But it's because they didn't trust autonomy, it was a relatively brand new capability. I think with like how autonomy is really ubiquitous in our daily lives now, that we're seeing kind of an inverse of that. Warfighters that I talk to are eager to adopt autonomy. They are willing to take 80% solutions and iterate on them, and I think that's really a fundamental tenet of how we can increase reliability, increase trust. Is take an 80% solution that's half-baked, or 80% baked there, instead of waiting to the 100% capability. We can do kind of combine, blur the lines between developmental tests, operational tests, and operations. Get that operator feedback, and really do like a software approach that we get a new app on our iPhone. It has bugs. The users give that feedback back to the developers. Developers take the bugs back, increase capability. They see how people are using it. Imagine new ways of adapting the technology. I think that's a really good approach for autonomy.
So there's been a lot of discussion about commercial and government partnerships, but also contracts, obviously, the government buying these ready-to-use capabilities. Can you talk a bit about what the government's role do you think should be in terms of creating this market for these specific technologies that have a military use case, but also can be used in the commercial sector?
Yeah, so I think over the history, we really see like the character of war changing, either based off what technology is available. You think like the Air Force was created that way, right? So the airplane was invented in 1903, then the character of war changed because we realized the utility of that technology. There's also other instances where the character of war that the military drives the technology change. Think like the atomic bomb, GPS, precision-guided munitions, those sorts of things that are very military unique. I think we're kind of at an inflection point now where we're really seeing kind of a blend of those two, where there's a huge commercial tech explosion, and that the military is now looking and say, okay, well, like that's not quite what we need, but it's very close. And so how can we kind of nudge the commercial industry to get more towards a commercial dual use? And that's really what AFWERX is about. We're doing tech exploration and seeing what's out there and having a temperature on the commercial market so that we can inform larger programs of record and partner with them 1 to 2 years before they have a formal requirement drop. They know there's already money in the pipeline coming down. We can do early experimentation, early prototyping, and real-world analysis of alternatives to help inform them. And so we can have them ready to catch those technologies when they have a formal RFP drop.
You mentioned how this work can inform other programs. Backstage, we were talking about CCA. Can you talk about how some of the things that you're working on can inform the Air Force's unmanned wingman capability? Yeah,
so it's an ecosystem. I think everyone's going to have a part in this, especially everyone in the S&T community is going to have a part in this between the lab developing it, the commercial marketplace, the testers, the operators. It's going to be a huge effort to have a collaborative autonomous platform in the Air Force. The key, there's going to be tons of landmines as we field those systems. And the key is going to be doing low cost, low risk experimentation to get to that point and find some of those landmines early and learn and feed that feedback loop into the larger programs. So one of the things that we're doing is with the small UASs, it's low cost, low risk. So we can do some of those low fidelity experiments, such as like how we're going to collect data, how we're going to do a pipeline process, how we're going to test these technologies and mature them in bridge platforms. And so I think there's large ecosystem. There's tons of people in place there. They're all working together towards it.
And so I'm just thinking of this because you have all of these, like in the future, where we have all of these different autonomous systems just kind of around, but like how do you make sure that they're talking to each other? How does that, like the networking piece, how does that factor into what you're doing?
Yeah, so we're not specifically working on any of the networks of how like the larger aircraft are going to talk to each other, but it's important to have standards and interface control documents, and certainly the ecosystem is working towards that.
Okay. And so from your perspective, do you think that commercial industry is really developing things faster than the military? And have you identified any areas where the military is absolutely going to have to develop their own capability, that they're not going to be able to rely on industry for that?
Yeah, I think commercial is absolutely developing capabilities faster than the military is. There's just a ton of expertise in commercial industry. There's a ton of passion, which is why I love working with startups and non-traditionals, because it's a little bit scrappy, and just everybody I talk to, including the CEO down to the worker bee level, is just passionate about the problems that they're solving. And really, that's why we launched Autonomy Prime, is because we recognized that the commercial industry was moving so much faster than the department. And, I mentioned that we did 18 months of internal research and external research, market research there, and noticed that there's a lot of good ideas in the government and in some of these the labs, both across the services, but really commercial has almost surpassed a lot of those efforts. So we wanted to harness that, and that's why we're investing in some of the autonomous technology. That's why we continue to use our cyber portfolio to invest in companies to mature both technology and their processes, business processes, just to work with the government, because I'll be honest, it's very difficult to work inside the government, especially for a new organization. We tend to leverage numerous regulations and processes and approvals and new systems you have to learn in order to kind of accomplish the tasks we've asked you to do. AFWERX is attempting to chip away at that iceberg to make things easier for everyone, but we still have a really long way to go.
You mentioned working with startups, and that's something that I hear a lot from senior leaders, like wanting to attract and work with or contract with these newer companies that are a bit more agile, necessarily, like more so than the prime contractors. But navigating working with the Defense Department is a challenge. Can you talk about how AFWERX does business and how maybe that could be more of the standard?
Yeah, so we leverage all our contracting tools in our toolbox and all the authorities that we've been given by Congress, the cyber authorities, a lot of the education piece too, just knowing kind of the path of least resistance, I'll call it, to get to companies. The OTA, other transaction authorities, we leverage those quite a bit. Cyber phase 3s to transition promising technologies. And we like to have a good relationship too. I've worked in large program offices where it's very adversarial, it's very requirements driven, and very focused on, well, the requirements document said that you wanted this button red, when really you meant it to be, pink or something, or just a slightly shade of red, but it wasn't, the hexadecimal red. We try to make it more objective based and focus on outcomes versus requirements and derive requirements from those outcomes, and have kind of a flexible contracting strategy and be open. So it's not just lobbing something over a fence, waiting 2 weeks for the government to eval it. We like to have a good, open talk and conversation as we're kind of developing our contracting strategies.
So you mentioned earlier the soft launch of Autonomous Prime. Can you walk us through what the next 6 months will be like? Because the new fiscal year starts in October, so tell us what's going to take you from a soft launch to fully fledged launch. Yeah,
so I mentioned that one of our critical S&T gaps we found during our market research was the ability to test autonomous systems and autonomous technologies piecemeal, right? So right now we have just about 4 platforms that we can test autonomy on. We have the Vista X-62 Vista, which you've probably seen in the news out at Edwards Air Force Base, the 2 XQ-58s down at Eglin Air Force Base, a handful of smaller UASs in the labs, and a UTEP-22 we contract out. We are focusing in the next 6 months or so, since we've soft launched, on building up the infrastructure for that proving ground to increase the throughput and capability. Once we have an approved budget in 24 and we have that money flowing, we'll release what's called an innovative capabilities offering, focused on certain tech areas. Similar to if you've researched the Agility Prime ICO, it'll be the same sort of construct. And that just allows us to issue OTAs, kind of an open BAA type construct. That we can bring companies in, do evals on them, and then start working on the OTA. But we need funding for that, obviously, and I'm hesitant to release it now with an uncertain funding doc because I don't want everyone to spend a lot of resources developing proposals when I don't have any money to award on those. So I'm trying to do you all a favor.
So I know I'm going to ask you to read tea leaves just a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's say you get all the money that you could ever do anything with. Where do you see this portfolio and these capabilities in the next year?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that we get some more autonomous flights in controlled areas, very controlled environments in the next year. Whether that be the autonomous cargo airplanes I talked about, small dedicated UAS doing a specific military application, just seeing and demonstrating what's in the realm of possible so that when we develop requirements and we develop war plans, we can see like, oh, actually, we've done real world experimentation. This isn't a thought experiment anymore. We've actually done something and seen how it works and how we can adapt these technologies into the war plans.
So, I mean, we're talking about science and testing, so things go wrong.
Yeah.
So can you talk about some of the challenges that you expect to see?
Yeah, so certainly there's going to be tons of road mines, and I don't pretend to have it all figured out at all. But that's why I think that experimentation is so important, is because we can do low risk just experiments and just try stuff out and see who comes out of the woodwork and says, well, actually, you need to talk to these 12 people before you fly things. I think it's going to be a major challenge is testing autonomy in the Air Force and the DoD is still fairly an immature thing. So we're going to just have to do something and figure out what are we missing, right?
Yeah. And to the extent that you can talk to this, do you think that you have all of the authorities and the policies needed to actually get not just this technology like off the ground and it working well in testing, but also integrated on the battlefield?
Yeah, so I believe like in an innovation organization, you need three things, and that's people, resources, and authorities. You need a small, highly enabled, agile team that's motivated to get the job done, right? You need to be properly resourced, both with funding and also just facilities to do your work, and then the authorities piece, right? I'm not sure, actually, if we have all the authorities to integrate these technologies in. Certainly the PEOs are eager to adapt new commercial technologies. They do not want to pay to reinvent the wheel, and we shouldn't. Why should we take 12 months or more to develop a capability that already exists in the commercial marketplace? I think we'll find out if we have the authorities, and if not, we'll work with our appropriators and the proper regulators to get them.
Okay. I want to take a pause right now and ask for questions in the audience. Sydney.
Sydney.
Surprisingly. Hi, Sydney Friedberg from Breaking Defense. I recently was doing some research on lessons learned from the Ukraine war, where, the iconic aerial vehicle, is not the F-16 or the MiG-29. It's the DJI Mavic.
Yeah.
And talked to a bunch of experts who said, somewhat to my surprise, the Ukraine is losing 5,000 to 10,000 of these a month. We don't know what the Russians are losing. Most of that's being lost to fairly simple electronic warfare, because these things require a constant live link to operate. And yet, they said, hardening against EW just probably isn't cost effective. It's just cheaper to buy more off-the-shelf drones. What are you guys looking at in the low-end sort of tactical ISR and perhaps strike drone world in terms of hardening against EW? And are there, potential breakthroughs, for example, in compact AI that actually can fit on one of these small platforms without a huge amount of compute, that could change the game, that could change the equation by making them less dependent on the constant live link to the operator?
Yeah, so it's certainly autonomy. I can't talk about any of the EW techniques or hardening capabilities. It's not really my area of expertise. But certainly autonomy is going to enable us to have less of a reliance on link and having human in the loops as we develop trust and we develop the capability to go on a path detect and avoid obstacles and find a target that it needs to search for.
Can you fit much autonomy on these platforms, though? Because it takes compute.
It does take compute, yeah.
You're not training a large language model on the back of a DJI Mavic.
Right, yeah. We're looking at edge compute as part of like enabling technologies and figuring out how they do things faster.
Yes.
Hey, thank you very much for being here. My name is John Raviv. I'm with Capital One. Thank you for putting on this event and for being here. Two-part question, unrelated parts, so get ready.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna write it
Yeah, I
down.
know. I saw you. So I thought I'd throw it at him. First question was actually building on Sydney a little bit. Has your office or you seen anything, or has the industry that you work with seen anything coming out of Ukraine that has made you say, maybe we should focus more on, let's say, re-emerging technologies rather than emerging technologies, if you catch my drift? And the second unrelated part is, what have you seen out of your, I'll call it your startup community, partners, whatnot, in the context of a rising rate environment and their financing sources perhaps being a little more constrained today than they were 4 years ago? To what extent were all these startup businesses and organizations in the Defense Department benefiting from money being free? Now that money is actually quite expensive, or not quite expensive, but not free anymore, is that impacting how that conversation and how much activity you see in that space? Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, there's a lot, but I appreciate it.
Yes. And I am by no means a finance expert. I'm an engineer. So I'm going to not answer that one respectfully. But I will say that companies are eager to work with the government. There's also a lot of just patriotism I see with some of these defense dual-use startups. Just reminded of a company like multicultural, multinational company, but they have the American flag right in front and center, and everyone is excited to work on the military applications versus their commercial. Like they just that's what keeps them up or wakes them up in the morning and brings them to work. So certainly, I don't see the industry drying up at all. On the Ukraine side, re-emerging tech. I think really one of the lessons we learned is like Clausewitz is still right? The mass is still kind of a key tenet of warfare, and then your ability to adapt to the fog of war and out-innovate your enemy can create decisive advantages. So how we do that, I think, looking at kind of re-emergent technologies, the DJI drones for ISR, taking things that are off the shelf and what can we throw in our pockets now when we go to war or grab off the shelf is going to help in any battlefield.
John?
Thank you. John Harper with Defense Scoop. Can you give us an idea of the throughput you're envisioning for this proving ground that you're going to be building up? How many systems and how quickly can you put those through that?
Yeah, so it'll certainly be very slow at first as we learn and kind of figure out our processes. But I imagined 1 to 2 tests per week, testing new systems and new capabilities. That could be very based off kind of what's coming down the pipe, what users are asking for, what POs are asking for. But yeah, typically like doing 1 test per week, 1 to 2 tests per week is what we envision.
Hi, Bill Hederman, CSIS Maxwell. This morning, there was a brief video of a Russian soldier surrendering to a drone. It was flying overhead, and he did some signals, et cetera, and the Ukrainians saw it, and they found a way to get this person in. I don't think I ever heard of anyone surrendering to the Air Force while airborne before. I was wondering if you had heard anything about it.
No.
I guess not. Okay.
I have not. That's interesting.
It seemed to me that if we could give Russian soldiers a way to easily surrender, it might be a real helpful thing for this war.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
And autonomy is different than AI, but that comment made me think about responsible AI and the kind of cultural impacts it could have when you have these unmanned systems that are just interacting with a population. Is that, and obviously I know the autonomy is different, but are you guys considering anything like that in terms of like the broader like policy efforts there?
Yeah, so certainly the prime model is looking to risk reduce technology, financial risk, but also the policies and how we use them. We're not specifically looking at responsible AI because we are looking at kind of bounded autonomy at this point. But that's always something we have in the back of our mind as we develop capabilities, and we need to make sure they're responsible, they're not doing anything that is unethical or inhumane. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Any other take, John?
Sure, why not? I'll take another
Okay.
one. So in terms of this proving ground, will you also be focusing on systems that can employ weapons, or is this mostly just testing platforms and ISR capabilities and navigation capabilities and things like that?
Yeah, we're just focusing on the mission systems, navigation, ISR, those sorts of things. And we're not focusing on weapons employment at this point.
What are some of the new partnerships within FWorks, also within any of your portfolios? Can you talk about any of the partnerships, initiatives that you have going on?
Yeah, so the Proving Ground, I guess I actually did not mention the partnership we have with the Air Force Chief Data and AI Office, Eglin Air Force Base. They have a new, it's called ADAX, so Autonomy, Data, and AI Experimentation Unit, in partnership with the CDAO and AFWorks is standing up the Proving Ground. So that's certainly one. We were talking backstage about OSC, the Office of Strategic Capital. We work very closely with them to signal emerging tech areas. Dr. Ratchey, speaking later this afternoon, he was an AFWorks alum. He certainly takes most of the lessons learned from his interactions with the community there towards OSC, and we have a very, very close relationship with our engagements team.
Yeah. The OSC effort, and NATO also has this tech accelerator called Diana. I'm seeing this trend when you have like these government, sovereign nation organizations, entities. They're clamoring for these startups to kind of come work with them. Do you think that this model is working? What do you kind of read more tea leaves? Can you?
Yeah. I definitely think that bringing in the startup community helps us kind of think of new ideas if we're open to it.
Yeah.
That's why we kind of focus more on outcomes versus requirements. We don't pretend to know what exactly we need before we start the process. We're very open to learning and revisiting those objectives as we go through the process. So certainly any of the, like Diana and NATO, we're stronger together than we are as one. I think someone famous said that. But we need to partner together and get those new ideas. So AFWorks certainly is talking to, Prime doesn't specifically work with the NATO, but the Spark division does as we develop the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Patty Nyberg. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg Government. Yesterday, we heard a lot about Task Force 99, and I'm curious if you can kind of describe the relationship between AFWorks and Task Force 99. I know you guys both do innovation, but kind of on different parts of it.
Yeah, so Task Force 99 is obviously, I think it's AFCENT's kind of very related to Task Force 59, et cetera. It's like a Spark cell, you could say, but at the AFCENT level at IUD. Working very closely with warfighters to answer operational problem sets. We have a very similar mission set, so natural that we partner together. I can't go into any specifics, but yeah, we can have a relationship.
Hi, Samuel Plank with Vita Inclinata. There's been a lot of discussion about the Valley of Death with cyber companies. We put a lot of investment into small businesses to produce new tech, a lot of really promising technology. What can be done to kind of help bridge that, make sure that we're seeing a really good return on all of these investments that we're making?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
What can be done to make sure that we're seeing, that more of these companies can bridge that Valley of Death, that they can, make a good return on the investment that cyber funds are making?
Yeah, so I think that's really like working closely with your user community, working very closely with the PEOs. We've really found over the past couple of years that The SBIR portfolio is great to do phase 1s, phase 2s, and kind of see what's in the realm of possible. I don't think we've got it quite figured out on how we pick out the winners out of those small bets and transition them. It's really difficult to scale and bring into the larger ecosystem, which is why like the new Prime model is really focusing on emerging requirements and trying to be a tech scout and inform the PEOs on how the SBIR portfolio can answer their emerging needs, because the PEOs are really the acquirers and the sustainers. And so AFWERX can't do that alone. We certainly have learned that. The DAF in general, like an airman that's sitting on a maintenance flight line, working his day job and then being a tech POC for a SBIR company as a part-time duty, like they certainly can't be the scaling factor because it takes a ton of time and expertise in how to navigate the acquisition system. And so we need to do a really better job of identifying kind of requirements 1 to 2 years before they're going to be released and tap into that SBIR portfolio and see what we've already invested in and see how we can connect those requirements.
I want to pick up on that a little bit. You mentioned that you guys need DoD writ large, I'm assuming. It needs to be better at picking winners. Can you shed some light on what you mean by that and what you think could be improved upon in doing that and picking winners out of these startup companies?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, we invest $1 billion a year almost, right, in technologies, in companies, both to develop their tech and their business practices to invest in or work with the government. I think we can do a lot better job of knowing where those investment areas are that can connect directly. It's such a large ecosystem that it's very hard to manage. Right? It's a little bit chaotic. We're doing a decent job of knowing like where tech areas are that we've invested in. I think the specific performance of those is still an area that we can do better in to connect. Like, I don't know specifically what airman snuffing on the flight line is doing because he's 1,000 miles away working in his with his blinders on, heads down, focused completely on the mission and his passion. When I may have the same problem. So we just need to do a better job of communicating across like the greater ecosystem. There's certainly programs that are out there that are attempting to do that, and like I said, it's all an experiment, and we're trying something, seeing if it works, and if it doesn't work, we feed the lessons learned back into it and try something new.
Follow up. Can you talk a little more about, you mentioned it earlier, about just connectivity around all the various organizations in the department that have a similar kind of almost overarching mission, whether it's a new place like OSC or some of your counterparts in the other services, and what your connectivity is there? Because to me, a commercial technology firm doesn't think of things in Army, Air Force, Navy. It's just big opportunity, and more services in there is a bigger opportunity, and therefore can help close the case a little bit more easily for them. And then secondarily, kind of related to that idea, is there a risk that we're over complicating a process that was supposed to be simple with all these different organizations all kind of doing bits and pieces in various forms in different areas?
Yeah, there's certainly a risk there that we're overcomplicating things, and that just tends to be the nature of a bureaucracy, right? There's just overcomplicate things in the name of reducing risk to an organization. And sometimes we just need to take risk and move out, right? I think that we are making strides in that. We certainly don't have it right yet. It's not perfect, but I think we're learning as we go. About your kind of, I guess it would be commercial first, that's really, the onus is on us, and kind of knowing technology and understanding how we can adapt that technology to answer military problem sets. And that's really what my tech scouting function is for. As we build that capability out, is knowing like how can the financial marketplace aid in, for instance, like JADC2. You have a stock. You have stock markets where you have time critical information that you need to happen. That's the same thing in command and control. Like how can we adapt those technologies to military use cases?
In the spirit of communication, can you talk a bit about I guess, what you would like people to know who want to work with AFWorks, whether that's the companies with this dual-use technology that can help be tested and hopefully fielded if it makes it beyond the valley of death, and then also across the DoD ecosystem, like senior leaders, et cetera.
Yeah, so on the first part, like how to work with AFWorks and the DoD, I think the easiest is the SBIR process. We have 4 open calls a year. They happen every quarter. There's the phase ones, which are white paper. They're capped at a dollar value. Phase twos, which are more of a prototype, capped at 1.2 million, around there. And then a phase 3, for kind of the promising technologies. The phase 3s are kind of standard contracts. They're not done under the SBIR budget, which are mandated small businesses. They can use regular RDT&E for that. But phase 1s and phase 2s are only open to small businesses and non-traditionals. That is the best way to get your foot in the door in the government. The phase 1s are really meant as a customer exploration. So you have a tech. You have access to the government and a set of SMEs that can help you connect your technology to an operational problem set. Phase 2, then, if it's a valid connection, we can spin you into a phase 2, or you can apply for a direct to phase 2 portfolio call, and then prototype that technology to further explore your military use cases. And then if you're good there, you can spin into a phase 3. One thing that I like to educate both industry and the government, for that matter, is if you're trying to reach a company from the government side that has ever had any sort of SBIR, you can go sole source to them. You don't have to go through a J&A process and a FAR-based sole source requirements approval. Like if you have a SBIR and then the company that you want to get to has, their technology was developed related to that SBIR, then you can go direct sole source to them. A lot of people don't understand that. Same with if you have a selectable, not funded phase 2. If a user in the community and in the government wants to take that, is really interested in it, but it wasn't funded, like they always come to AFWorks and say, well, how do I get this funded? I'm like, well, do you have RDT&E dollars? Yes. I'm like, well, okay, well then just put those RDT&E dollars towards that contract. It's already been competitively evaluated, and you can just award it. That's some education that I typically give to many program managers, and that don't kind of realize the flexibility of that whole process. So that is really the best way to get your foot in the door in the government.
And I want to end on somewhat of a panel cliche. I want to ask you, what keeps you up at night? But you're an engineer, so I feel like your answer might be different. So tell us
I'll take
about that.
the Mattis approach, and nothing keeps me up at night. I should be keeping everyone else up at night.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us.